I guess the prevailing attitude was go along to get along. No one wanted to take on this group. They feared repercussions, they feared reprisals. And so people would design some, cockamamie way of satisfying them. This is a course outline form that every teacher has to develop if one's going to propose a new class. Include a description of how course topics are treated to develop a knowledge and understanding of race, class, and gender issues. That's all classes. That's not sociology, it's not political science. This is physics, mathematics. I had a friend here who was teaching ornamental horticulture, and she had to explain how she was going to develop a knowledge of race, class, and gender issues in her class on succulent gardens. So this to me seemed an affront to any notion of academic freedom. I was cast, of course, as the predictable racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. If you can get students persuaded of a couple of basic ideas about the nature of reality, you can go a long way toward succeeding in a social engineering project in which you're engaged.
Welcome to the great marketplace of ideas, the American University. Here, freedom of expression, honest discussion, and academic inquiry reign supreme, and the future leaders of our world meet as equals in a forum of open debate. At least that was the idea. Problem is, the great marketplace of ideas has been reduced to just that, an idea. In reality, academia today is not a marketplace at all. It's a monopoly. But it wasn't always like this. In the late 1960s, students fought successfully for their right to dissent from the dominant thinking of the day. Fueled by anger over Vietnam, protests erupted on campuses nationwide. And even though the protests were sometimes ugly and violent, it was hard to argue with the protesters' desire for free speech on campus. The notion that students and professors should be free to share their ideas without fear of punishment is the very embodiment of what the university should be. This belief led to what was then known as the campus free speech movement. I know all about it because my parents were among those protesters, and growing up, they made sure I had the same freedom of thought that they fought for. But when I got to college, I realized that not everyone who grew up in the 60s still lived by those same ideals today. Somewhere along the way, the campus free speech movement got killed by university regulations. And policies that are supposed to be ensuring tolerance and diversity are instead being used to silence people with alternative views. Race, class, and gender issues are being used as ammunition in an all-out political war. And what's at stake is nothing less than the once great marketplace of ideas, the American University. In the 1960s, protesters fought for their right to free speech. But today, protesters are fighting to shut down other people's speech. This happens frequently whenever someone disagrees with the dominant campus thinking on matters of racial politics. Just ask Ward Connerly. For years, Ward Connerly has opposed the racial preference system of affirmative action. As a member of the Board of Regents, he was instrumental in getting racial preferences banned within the University of California. More recently, he brought the fight to Michigan, but apparently, not everyone there thought he had a right to speak. Fears for his safety required a huge security detail, and throughout his speech, he was repeatedly shouted down.
How come you're so two-faced?
It troubles me to see a black man stand in front of me and speak out against affirmative action.
It bothers you that a black man would be against your point of view. If that isn't saying
Yep, 50 years after the start of the civil rights movement, and some people on campus still believe that blacks don't have the right to think as individuals.
If you question the traditional ways of doing things, then almost immediately you're characterized as an enemy of your group. You're seen as an inauthentic black. You're not really black. You're an Oreo or Aunt Jane or Uncle Tom. People in academia would expect me to support affirmative action.
Back in 1998, when racial preferences were banned at the University of California, and I was at Berkeley, I lost count of how many conversations I had with people where they quite simply assumed that I was against the ban.
A lot of white people will say, well, how dare you criticize affirmative action?
It was just assumed, especially because I'm black. People would come to my office door shaking their heads about the ban. It would never have occurred to anybody that I might have a different view.
I've applied for grants, and I've been told that the reason I didn't get those grants was that I oppose affirmative action.
There's a presumption about black students. There's a presumption that black students are homogeneous. A black student who comes into a classroom could be from Harlem, could be from Dominican Republic, could be from Brazil, could be from Africa, or it could be from an affluent elite family or a very poor one. We don't really know.
Black people are poor, and that therefore you can't expect them to make top grades and scores. Well, that's extremely unreflective. All black people have not been poor for many decades now. They never were, but the idea that black and poor are essentially the same thing is far out of date.
Lydia Broder is a former Michigan State student who comes from a mixed family.
My youngest brother is adopted from Guatemala.
I always wanted to save the whole third world. I want to adopt everybody.
We stayed in the hotel. They brought Ben to us, kind of snuck him in, literally snuck him in.
This mother had apparently had 13 babies and 6 died. She had this little child she wasn't able to feed.
You never saw a more beautiful baby in your life. I brought him home. We put him in the sink for a bath. He splashed all the water out of the sink, and that's been his personality ever since.
I declare I'm the king of the house.
Do you remember almost burning down the motorhome?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I ever ground you for that?
No.
You're grounded.
Ain't that a surprise?
Lydia doesn't think it's fair that her two brothers would be treated differently under affirmative action, so she sent a letter to the school paper.
I never write to papers. I wrote a little letter to the editor for the next day's papers, like 200 words. It was itty-bitty.
She wrote an editorial specifying her experiences as the sister of 2 brothers who are different colors.
Why should they be treated differently by the schools?
Michigan State University and all our other state universities and state government are going to choose between one of them because one of them has darker skin. And yet they're raised in the same home, with the same parents, in the same town, with the same advantages and disadvantages.
You'd be hard-pressed to say that my youngest son, Benjamin, has some history of discrimination in the United States we have to make up for.
They're going to say that somehow he has been disadvantaged and needs an artificial leg up.
If anything, that's going to give my adopted brother some kind of false idea that he's oppressed somehow.
No matter what he achieves, there's always going to be a taint on it.
I don't want that for him at all. I want him to get ahead on his own brains, of which he has plenty.
I'll give you $10 for that light.
$10 for this light?
Uh-huh.
You're going to have to do a little better than that, my friend.
No matter how you divide people, economic lines, racial lines, it isn't right to treat people differently.
Judging people based on their skin color is racism, no matter which way you look at it.
But believe it or not, expressing that opinion on a college campus can be considered hate speech. That's what happened at a number of schools where students held so-called affirmative action bake sales. These sales offer identical pastries at different prices depending on the race of the buyer. The purpose is to illustrate affirmative action and mock it at the same time.
But you don't treat everybody like they're prejudiced.
That discrimination is wrong. We should judge people based on individual characteristics.
But you guys are the ones that are the homophobic ones that...
Homophobic? I didn't say anything about homosexuality.
Many schools use affirmative action in the admissions process. Applicants are sorted into categories and judged as members of this or that group. Yet some of the same schools that use racial criteria in admissions will not allow students to illustrate it by using racial criteria when selling cupcakes. Administrators stopped similar bake sales at SMU, William & Mary, the University of Washington, UC Irvine, and at Northwestern, where the students involved were threatened with arrest.
Why the students having an affirmative action bake sale Part of the reason is that in most classes you cannot have a genuine dialogue because students are afraid, and so they find other modes of expression.
I was in this class, it was a group of 200. The professor started talking about something that sounded very familiar, and I realized he was talking about my letter.
Well, this professor's holding up her article and saying this person is an idiot.
This writer has other motivations and is a racist and stupid and all the other things without actually refuting any of the argument that she put forth.
So I'm slumping down in my seat.
It wasn't right in any way for me to have to pay for his political podium.
The letter had nothing to do with the class material. Zip.
He went up there and he went on a rant.
This is not why we hire professors.
I don't think they should be treated differently. I think they should be treated equally. That's pretty unprejudiced.
Well, you see, Lydia, views like yours can cause problems for school administrators. After students at Columbia held an affirmative action bake sale, some students took offense and marched on the administration with a list of demands.
The so-called bake sale that happened, with its intent to drive minority students off of campus, already marginalized in racist capitalist America.
My sexist, my racist, and my homophobic country.
Yes, I am angry today! And I'm hostile! But come and talk to me about it and deal with this anger that you made in me! Stop it. Stop it. Just stop it.
The anti-affirmative action bake sale was 3 weeks ago.
I need my university to be a vehicle for change and understanding.
We were out here protesting for 2 days before he made a statement. And this statement was incredibly weak.
We are going to be giving them a list of demands and suggestions as to what we think that office can be doing.
We want structural change. That's what we want. We want things to really change on campus.
What do they want to change? Other people's right to free speech? Other people's right to disagree?
If they want to render you helpless and make people not take you seriously, they label you. Oh, prejudiced. Oh, homophobic. Oh, there's a bigot. No one listens to that person.
When it comes to these sacred cows, racial politics, and a few other things, there is no discussion. There's a way to think. That's what universities have become. This is the way you think.
Central Connecticut State University set up a panel to discuss slavery reparations, a proposal for paying today's black Americans for the sins of slavery over 150 years ago. All 7 speakers invited by the school supported the idea. Professor Jay Bergman questioned the lack of intellectual diversity on the panel. Bad idea, Jay.
2 individuals from the African Studies Department composed a statement. By opposing reparations, I was acting in a way that was akin to Hitler, the Nazis, and the Ku Klux Klan. Calling someone who disagrees with you a racist, a Nazi, and a Klansman simply for calling for intellectual diversity is engaging in a kind of intellectual and academic thuggery. Words like that are not designed to further a conversation or to enhance a debate. They are designed to end the debate, to delegitimize the speaker.
When discussing race on campus, the smartest thing to do is just keep your mouth shut, unless you know the right things to say.
My concern is doing away with whiteness. Whiteness is a form of racial oppression, sure. The suggestion is that it is somehow possible to separate whiteness from oppression, and it is not. There can be no white race without the phenomenon of white supremacy. If you abolish slavery, you abolish slaveholders. In the same way, if you abolish racial oppression, you do away with whiteness. Treason to whiteness is loyalty to humanity.
Your views are fairly well received in academia.
Yes, they're legitimate, not to say that everyone agrees, but sure. I could not point to any examples where it has provoked political censorship.
Really? Okay, well then here's a quick recap. On a college campus, these people are considered dangerous radicals, but this guy's completely legit.
Unfortunately, the way we talk about race does have a way of putting dividers between us.
To me, whiteness is an identity that arises entirely out of oppression.
To be black is to be aggrieved. These are people who nurture a sense of white people as the enemy.
Whiteness is not a culture, it's not a religion, it's not a language, it's simply an oppressive social category.
The essence of black authenticity is to be aggrieved. That's the idea that we're stuck with.
Blackness is an identity that can be plausibly argued to arise out of a resistance to oppression.
Once you assert that you're not particularly aggrieved, then people start wondering whether you're black at all.
Black studies is the study of a people that has formed itself in resistance to its oppression.
Most African American studies departments elegantly teach you how to be a victim. They teach you how you're a victim in ways that you didn't think about.
And the task is to bring this minority together in such a way that it makes it impossible for the legacy of whiteness to continue to reproduce itself.
You nurture the feeling among the black students that it is a racist campus. You pay people basically to tell them that in the classroom and in administrative offices. Obviously something's wrong, but you get to satisfy your sense of being a noble person by pretending that the black students are victims. That's something that now is not only a personality trait, but it's institutionalized on the university campus.
A lot of our students, I think, are unconsciously racist. It's not conscious, so they don't really see it in themselves. And of course, that's something that nobody wants to admit, that they're unconsciously a racist.
So to protect students from all these unconscious racist zombies roaming around campus, many schools have turned to an old idea, segregation. William and Mary sponsored a racially segregated orientation program. So did Tufts and Brown. At many schools, students can live all their years in racially and ethnically segregated housing. Even graduation day itself is segregated on a number of campuses. From the time students first set foot on campus to the minute they leave, schools are preaching racial separatism, and all in the name of diversity.
For all the lip service that's paid to, inclusion and, racial harmony, the exact opposite is what you see on a college campus. I've never been to a more segregated environment than I have here.
I could see a segregationist coming on our campus and completely loving what they're seeing. All the non-white students are stuffed over in the multicultural center. The women are all in the women's center, and the gays are in the gay center.
Well, we're headed towards greater polarization, and I believe that a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've taken identity politics too far.
People are so exquisitely sensitive and so exquisitely vigilant that they end up condescending to black people when actually the idea was to treat black people as equals. Things have changed now, and if we're talking about those things happening because of history, then we're getting further and further from that history.
I have a dream.
Martin Luther King's dream was to open doors for people, not to have the door closed on certain people in favor of other people. And yet, in the name of diversity, universities are judging people based on their color. They do this invoking the name of Martin Luther King, but is that what he really wanted? Was that part of the dream he had?
The controversy surrounding race on campus extends far beyond affirmative action. Just ask Steve Hinkle. Steve found himself in trouble for posting flyers announcing an upcoming event. The local college Republicans were hosting a speech by conservative author Mason Weaver.
We brought Mason Weaver just because we wanted somebody that was going to be dynamic. We didn't want, somebody stiff up there to give a boring lecture about tax policy or something. Just the title of his book was provocative enough. It's okay to leave the plantation. It's about economic freedom, the new Underground Railroad. And the new Underground Railroad being capitalism, free markets. It had a catchy title, it was provocative, and that's what we need to get people at our events. We advertised on campus with flyers. Took the title of his book and put it in quotes with the picture under it. Said, "Come here, Mason Weaver." We plastered the flyers all over campus, like we do for every speaker.
By hanging a flyer in the Multicultural Center, Steve began an 18-month odyssey that wound up in federal court.
One of the students in there recognized the flyer. She confronted Steve and basically told him to take his flyer and go, and if he refused to do so, she would call the police.
That flyer is offensive, and we have a right to not be offended.
She mentioned the flyer as being an example of hate speech.
Do you think that people have a right not to be offended?
Nobody has a right to not be offended. I'm offended every day in class. One of your professors bashed my views.
What was her objection?
The use of the word plantation.
I tried to explain to him that this was the title of his book. This is a speaking event. You guys can come. There's a question and answer period.
He wanted to talk to them, and they said, well, if you don't understand why this flyer is offensive to us, we don't have anything to talk about.
They told me to leave. The student said, I'm going to leave or call the police.
There are constructive ways of dealing with that anger, not calling the police on Steve for hanging a flyer.
The police report stated that a young white male was posting racial material. That's what they said, offensive racial material.
He was very upset, and he asked me what he should do.
I called my parents. I said, listen, I think I'm in some kind of trouble here. I don't know what's going on, but I want you guys to be here. It was myself, both of my parents, the Director of Judicial Affairs, Ardith Tregenza, and the Vice President of Student Affairs, Cornell Morton. He referred to me as an identifiable young white male member of the Cal Poly College Republicans. And he says, although it's not exclusively white or male, there's some implication. You know, a white male, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, that I was a flashpoint for these students' anger. That was the exact word. Just me being white, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, that I was somehow prone to offend people that didn't look like me. We're all students of the same age. We all go to the same school. You know, there's more the same about us than was different. So I've never thought, okay, this person doesn't look like me, they're automatically going to hate me, or they're going to not like me, or I'm going to somehow just offend them by being in their presence. At one point, he suggested to my parents, he looked at my dad and suggested that I was maybe raised in a manner to not treat other people respectfully. They wanted me to see a university psychologist to discuss emotional barriers. I have some emotional disorder because I'm conservative. Something's got to be wrong with me. You need to write letters of apology to these students and make an appointment with a psychologist. They handed me a sheet which listed everything from verbal reprimand all the way to permanent expulsion from the CSU system. And they says, your punishment could get worse. And they slid this to me, and that was all they said. And I told them, I said, I'm not going to write these letters, and I'm not going to make that appointment.
I found out about what happened to Steve Hinkle right before I came to the campus. And I called Steve up, and he verified that he came in, tried to put the flyer up. I said, what flyer? My flyer? The flyer that has the title of my book on it? Yeah, I said, how can that offend anybody? And who cares if you offend it? Why is that against the law now to offend someone?
It's clear the university wants to charge him with something, and they struggle for a while trying to figure out what.
I entered at like 6:45, maybe I was there for 2-3 minutes tops, and left. And they said that they were so, I guess, just distraught, they couldn't have their meeting at 7.
They called the police. And when the police showed up, they complained that the police showing up was a disruption.
In the hearing, I sat right there while they said that when the police came, that further disrupted their meeting.
Nobody could come in and say he was rude.
It wasn't about my conduct. I was very civil. I asked them if they wanted to sit down and talk about it. I said, please. I said, thank you.
This was not fair. This was not set up with intention to be fair.
Well, we had quite a bit of testimony. We had a 7-hour hearing.
There were many amazing moments, not the least of which was when Steve Hinkle asked Ardith Tregenza what disruption actually meant.
I'm being charged with a disruption of a campus event. She says, I don't see how that applies to this case. And she just laughed it off and says,
gosh, I feel like I'm on Jeopardy.
And she says, I don't know, I'm not a dictionary.
You don't need to be a lawyer to understand that if you can't even define what somebody is charged with, you have a little bit of a problem.
They found me guilty, obviously.
We feel like the whole process was a large part of the punishment. You know, like a 7-hour hearing for trying to post a flyer is not acceptable.
They dropped the charge of seeing the psychologist.
But of course, it was still in his transcript. He was found guilty of something absolutely absurd. They wanted him to write an apology.
I told him his back was against the wall, that if he had to write a public letter of apology, that would haunt him with the internet for a lot of years.
Here's Steve Hinkle, who has a problem with black people, and he had to have the police called on him because he was putting up racist material. I didn't want that on my record. I'm not going to start out my career as a young adult having that skeleton in my closet.
He was prepared to let Cal Poly, kick him out.
Cal Poly was savaged in the press.
It was on Fox News, it was on CNN. After a lot of media attention, the university sent me a letter, and they said that they're not going to pursue the charges anymore because their objectives had been met. So here I'd been harassed for 2 months, and they're telling me their objectives had been met. I'm like, wait a minute. I didn't comply with any of your punishment, but yet your objectives have been met? What are your objectives? Was it to harass college Republicans or young conservatives? What's going on? But they didn't say they were dropping the case. So I still had this guilty charge on my record.
We told them almost a year before, like, you don't stand a chance in this case. This is not a close call.
They didn't listen to us for almost a year. They listened to the judge and said, okay, we're going to settle.
They lost on every single possible grounds.
My record had to be expunged. My legal fees had to be paid.
$40,000 out of the taxpayer's pocket.
They could not have ever believed they had a case. They were just trying one thing after another, hoping that before they go to court, he would quit.
This is a perfect example of how hypocritical it is to want diversity, but not diversity of ideas.
Were they opposed to Steve's being a white conservative, or were they opposed to Mason Weaver being a black conservative?
All of the above.
It wasn't a problem with the flyer. It wouldn't matter what it was. They used the plantation because, to them, it's their plantation. He was going to the front door, bringing in a black speaker on campus, a conservative speaker, and that was against Master's rules. They were attacking Steve Hinkle.
If the administrators at Cal Poly wanted to kick Steve out of school simply for hanging a flyer, I wonder what they would do to me for asking questions about it.
Hello,
I'm looking for some university official to comment on the Stephen Hinkle case.
That would be public affairs you need to go to.
Here's the statement.
Could you read it for us?
Oh, I gotta give it to you.
You can't read the statement?
No, but that's the statement that we're giving everybody.
There's no apology here for Mr. Hinkle.
That's the statement, and you're welcome to film anywhere on campus. So, good luck.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cal Poly never did apologize to Steve Hinkle, and they still refuse to admit they did anything wrong. Maybe Cal Poly's president would have the courage to explain the school's actions. Hi, how are you?
Good.
I was wondering if we might be able to speak with the university president.
Hi. Would you please put that down? Put it down now. Come on.
So I take it we can't speak with the university president?
Who are you?
My name's Evan Maloney. Nice to meet you.
From which organization?
I am an independent filmmaker.
Well, good for you. You don't have an appointment here, as I understand it.
Well, we've tried to get in touch with a number of administrators, and to date we haven't been able to get anyone to even respond to our emails or phone calls. So I figured we'd stop by.
Come on down here, please.
Is there any way we could speak with the president of the university?
No, come here. You don't have an appointment, and I'd like you to please...
It would just take a couple seconds.
Please come out of the office.
Well, I have a question. Does the university have a reaction to... do you have anything to say to the taxpayers of California for the $40,000 that was spent in the Hinkle case?
Please come with me.
Can I ask the question?
Please come with me. You don't have an appointment. I don't know exactly what organization.
Well, I've been
you
trying to
represent.
get in touch with the university for a while.
I'd be delighted to consider a request for an appointment, but the president is not available to speak with you now.
Well, he was just in there, it looks like, just kind of sitting around.
The president is not available to speak with you at this time.
Is there anyone?
You don't have an appointment.
Well, I contacted the university a number of times. I contacted administrators.
Without an appointment.
Well, how can I get an appointment if no one will return my requests?
You're welcome to call me at my phone number, at our office phone number here, at a later point in time.
Instead of calling you, can I just talk with you now?
No, I'm busy. I don't have time to deal with your request at this time. Michelle, would you please call the public safety office? You do not have an appointment to see...
But I couldn't get an appointment.
You don't have an appointment to see the president?
No one would respond to my requests.
Well, I understand your frustration, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with an appropriate university official. Certainly welcome to go and speak to our Director of Public Affairs, Leah Colt. I'll be glad to respond to your questions.
Okay, so I have your word that they'll speak with me today?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry this has not been a civil visit, and I appreciate
I think it's been civil.
And you're welcome to go.
Why do you think it hasn't been civil?
Because you came up here and demanded an audience with the president of the university.
I was wondering if we might be able to speak with the university president? If no one will return my emails, if no one will respond to my phone calls, what other recourse do I have than to show up?
I've directed you to the public affairs office.
Well, you say this isn't civil. I think this is remarkably civil. I'm not...
Well, then I'll shake your hand. If you believe it's civil, then let's part company on civil terms. And you're welcome to go to the public affairs office.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right.
That guy was pretty funny. Of course, I forgot he told his assistant to call the police, and they soon surprised our cameraman from behind.
You need to leave or you're going to go to jail, okay?
All right.
So you need to grab your stuff. Let's go. Get in your cars. You need to roll. I can't comment on anything. I'm non-biased in this case, brother, but we got to do what we got to do. Here's what's going to happen. You guys need to go off campus and stay off campus, because if you come back, you're going to subject yourself to being arrested.
Okay, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir.
It was good meeting you guys, but I hope I don't see you again.
Likewise. Nothing personal. Right. Take care. You'd be surprised what can get you in trouble on a college campus. Just ask these students at the University of Tennessee.
Basically, there were these five
members of fraternity that were going to a party, and they dressed up like the Jackson 5.
5 members from Jackson, Tennessee, and they decided to dress up as the Jackson 5 because that's how they were known.
As part of their costumes, they were in blackface.
Right.
Everybody was dressed up in Halloween costumes.
It happened over a weekend, and then on the following Monday, they were reprimanded.
And the university ended up suspending the entire fraternity.
It was dealt with pretty harshly.
The party didn't even take place on campus. It took place on the Strip on Cumberland Avenue, which is the local hangout for the college kids. Believe me, Cumberland Avenue is highly integrated. It's not a situation where these guys could have done that, and if it was really that offensive, not been probably confronted several times.
They were walking back to their rooms, I guess, and they just happened to bump into some black students who didn't like that.
I was thinking about dressing up as Eddie Murphy, and I was going to paint my face black, and it was going to be because, I mean, I think he's hilarious, you know, and we were supposed to come as like an actor and actress, and so that's what I was thinking about doing, and it's kind of funny, I didn't end up doing it, but then after this all came out, I was thinking, you know, so if somebody had seen me from school or whatever and gotten offended, I probably could have gotten suspended, because I'd chosen to try and dress up and honor this comedian that I think is funny.
You ever seen a Halloween costume that offends you?
No, why?
Well, I'm dressed as the Pope.
Would you be offended if you saw 5 guys dressed up as the Jackson 5?
Wouldn't be offended by that, no.
If you saw 5 guys dressed up as the Jackson 5, would you be offended?
No.
Nah.
Even if they were white guys?
Why not?
I think it would be hilarious.
Even if they were white guys?
That is a crime, but it wouldn't offend me.
It's a crime because they're probably not good at dancing.
I've dressed up as the Jackson 5 before.
Have you really?
Yeah.
There were these guys that dressed up as the Jackson 5. But they were white? They got in trouble because they were white and they dressed up as the Jackson 5.
That's ridiculous. I mean, I would be offended by that. That's horrible.
3 black guys had chosen to paint their faces white and dress up as the Bee Gees, whether everybody would have gotten offended. You know, I doubt it.
Well, the man does have a point.
White Chicks.
In 2004, Sony Pictures released White Chicks, a film whose premise is based on the exact same parody, but with the roles reversed.
Yo, what's up, money? You got a problem?
The people running UT were pretty strict about Halloween costumes, so you can imagine what happened when this student was a target of emails calling him a raghead terrorist and suggested that he be shot in the face.
Nothing has been done about that.
Nothing has been done.
Absolutely nothing.
The threatening email was sent in response to an editorial Soukmani wrote for the school paper.
Soukmani had written an article in the Beacon about the bias of the Issues Committee in terms of who they bring to campus to speak and everything else.
The Issues Committee is actually a creation of the Student Government Association at the University of Tennessee. Their specific charge is to bring different speakers of interest to the campus.
The list, anyway, is all been liberal speakers.
They're not fulfilling their goal of stimulating intellectual discourse on campus. They're just mainly using all the students' money to propagandize and send out liberal message.
The Issues Committee itself is a very, very tight-knit group of people who all feel the same way ideologically. I think in general they will allow 1 or 2 kind of token conservatives on the committee.
So it was a long-running thing. Actually, Soukmani was really, though, the first person to, in a public way, continually point this out and criticize it and say this has got to change.
A friend of Soukmani's, who was a conservative, was the token conservative on the Issues Committee for a while. Couldn't get anything done, couldn't get a word in edgewise, and got frustrated and resigned.
I resigned simply because I didn't think that I could accomplish anything there with people who were so slavish to their own ideology that they couldn't open their minds at all. So why would I bother? Why would I stay? Unfortunately for them, they left me on the email list. And so I was receiving all of the emails that started circulating immediately after Soukmani's article ran.
Soukmani had written an article in the Beacon about the bias of the Issues Committee. And what happened was this kid, I guess, made a comment over email. He wrote a comment to the rest of the group.
He said, the next time you see one of these ragheads, shoot him right in the fucking face.
That's about as racially, insensitive as you can get.
The author of the most notorious of the emails was called in and basically given a little questioning by the Dean of Students Maxine Thompson, and then she announced to the University of Tennessee community that she felt that he had not violated any part of the university's code of conduct.
He didn't really receive any kind of punishment or any, I think he was banned from like the next 2 events. Just kind of a slap on the wrist. Nothing like a fraternity being suspended.
I mean, what the 5 guys did was stupid, but it wasn't threatening anybody. There wasn't an email which said, shoot him in the fucking face.
Kind of makes you think there might be a double standard there.
The faculty advisor of the committee wrote a comment in the paper saying, we're sorry that these things came out, that they were public. Imagine if Nixon said, well, I feel wrong that you people found out about this. About that, I feel terrible.
I'm sorry that it was taken out of context, and it's kind of like, in what context is shoot the effing raghead terrorist in the face? I mean, what context is that, okay? I don't know.
It seems that the administration's policy is hate speech is wrong against certain people. That's the message.
I believe that the reason no action was taken was because Soubhani is an outspoken conservative.
So here at the University of Tennessee, you have free reign to issue death threats against a conservative.
That's how it looks.
Great things are happening at the University of Tennessee.
I'm not for speech codes. I'm not for political correctness. But yes, it does show a double standard in that it violates their codes.
Frequently, double standards on campus come from selective application of speech codes, university regulations used to prohibit speech that in the rest of society is clearly protected by the First Amendment.
Speech codes are a complete scandal.
The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education looked into speech codes at over 350 schools. At 91% of these schools, students could find themselves punished simply for saying what's on their minds.
Rather than saying we're suppressing speech, let's say what we're doing is ending harassment. And then the problem then becomes, what is the definition of harassment?
Anything which is intimidating, which is going to poison the campus environment, can't be allowed.
If a person has their feelings hurt, they will say they've been harassed. If a person feels offended, they will say they've been harassed.
I was harassed and intimidated by that op-ed, by that cartoon.
When most people think harasser, they think stalking, they think extreme kinds of behavior.
If you're offended by it, that's implicitly considered harassment.
They don't want to be known as a harasser, so they go away quietly. It's a very clever way of implementing a speech code.
Over the years, speech codes have been used to prohibit some rather innocuous behavior. Brown University banned speech that might make someone feel angry, impotent, or disenfranchised. Colby College outlawed anything that could lead to a loss of self-esteem. Be careful who you turn down for a date. Suggestive looks were banned at Bryn Mawr. Haverford College prohibited unwelcome flirtations, and UConn banned inappropriate laughter. And at West Virginia University, students were told not to use the terms boyfriend or girlfriend. The school says those words are too gender-specific. Instead, lover and partner are preferred.
The truth truly is stranger than fiction. You could not make some of this stuff up.
We're all protected by the First Amendment. We can all say what we want, but on a private campus, what you say can have consequences. You're usually sentenced, you're usually required to undergo some sort of sensitivity training.
School officials often use speech codes to suppress political ideas they don't like.
A pro-affirmative action rally at Berkeley is not going to be shut down. I haven't seen a case yet where a Free Tibet rally has been shut down.
At Indian River Community College, a Christian Student Fellowship wanted to show Passion of the Christ at an outreach meeting, invite people to come see the Passion of the Christ. The administration refused to allow that movie to be shown. Their justification was that the Passion of the Christ was R-rated, and younger students who weren't old enough to see R-rated, who could not legally see an R-rated movie, would wander in, be exposed to it, and what a crisis that would be. At the same time, however, in fact, the very same semester that they denied the Christian Student Fellowship the ability to see the Passion of the Christ, they allowed a play to proceed in their theater called Fucking for Jesus. The script of the play featured a woman masturbating to pictures of Jesus Christ. 80 to 85% of our cases have involved conservative students. Very simply, it's a reflection of the proportion of the complaints that we receive in our office. Now, that's not to say that liberals don't also have their free speech rights suppressed on occasion. They definitely do, and when they do, fire helps.
I'm politically liberal. That like a lot of the people who work with fire are your average sort of mainstream Democrat doesn't necessarily believe this is really happening. And I didn't really understand it was really happening until I ended up being the guy who gets the fire cases.
The editors of alternative school papers understand it all too well because they're on the front lines. About 6 times a year, a dozen or so students at Yale spend hundreds of hours putting together a single issue of the Yale Free Press. Over the years, the Yale Free Press has been a target of systematic theft. Entire press runs have been repeatedly stolen from distribution points around campus, and to this day, the Yale administration has taken absolutely no action. Why would they be a target? And why won't Yale do anything to help?
We are conservative/libertarian monthly political publication. We've published on some pretty controversial subjects, such as the unionization of the grad students.
And of course, all the open-minded people at Yale treated their views with courtesy and respect.
There were piles of 300, so that doesn't disappear overnight. After it got stolen the first time, we reprinted it, put half out at first, kept half in my room. It was stolen. Put the other half out, it was stolen.
The previous issue was also stolen. And mysteriously enough, the most recent issue that we've put out is also missing.
The stolen papers cost the Yale Free Press thousands of dollars to print, but the Yale administration seemed uninterested.
They said that they might put a message out to the Yale community, but they never got to that for some reason.
They told us to take on the investigation.
We were also told not to try and victimize ourselves.
I've heard of thefts occurring on lots of other campuses of conservative papers.
The kind of problems that we've had pale in comparison to what happens on a regular basis at some other student papers like the Cal Patriot.
California Patriot is considered the conservative publication of UC Berkeley. It's affiliated with the Berkeley College Republicans.
The most popular way of distributing publications on campus is to leave them in certain designated publication areas, and every other publication does this. But when the Patriot was left there, we found that the stacks would disappear within minutes, and we weren't that popular.
We mainly distribute it in the main artery of campus, which is through Sproul Plaza and Sather Gate. The reason why we don't distribute it the way other papers do is because it either gets stolen or it gets vandalized.
A lot of the people that go to Berkeley actually might not have believed that conservatives existed there, and they are angry that they do. People don't like what you have to say, and they take it upon themselves to get rid of any information contrary to their views.
Well, why print it if it's simply going to be destroyed? No one's going to get it. So by handing it out, we can ensure that people do get it.
Someone stood out on Sproul Plaza, where we distribute by hand now, with a sign saying California racist and a big arrow, and stood out there with us all day long. So that was fun.
We get fascist and Nazis a lot, and Hitler Youth.
Last week, a guy came up to us with a bullhorn and told us the only good Republican is a dead Republican.
Andrea Irvin, our club president, they actually rammed her and tried to push her down.
The very first time Vanessa handed out the Patriot, she found out just how tolerant her fellow Berkeley students could be.
The woman approached me. She was clearly not too happy, but it was my first time passing it out, so I was excited. I come up to her, smile, and offer her a Cal Patriot. She blows her stack at that point and just hawks a loogie at me. There were 2 other times people attempted to spit on me that day, too. It was a bit shocking for me. I didn't expect spitting.
And political discrimination on campus isn't limited to just students. You remember Professor Freeberg. Now meet her husband, Roger. In many ways, the Freebergs seem like your typical American family. She teaches, he has a small local business, and they're the proud parents of 3 beautiful daughters. But they also have a horrible secret.
I'd been a member of the county's Republican Central Committee. It became noticed when I was involved in the recall that my last name and Laura's last name was the same.
I had a few people come into my office, kind of close the door behind them and say, well, please tell us this is a mixed marriage.
A lot of people were worried that maybe Laura was a closet Republican.
One colleague just really lost his temper and said, well, we never would have hired you if we'd known you're Republican.
In a little study we did, no one in the administration at Cal Poly is a Republican. No one in Laura's department is a Republican. I'm unaware of anyone in the School of Liberal Arts who's a Republican, except for Laura.
I was just very cautiously neutral since I wished to remain employed.
A lot of bad things happened. My house was attempted to be broken into, a swastika burnt on our lawn, and some really nasty threats to my children.
I was removed as department head of the psychology department, and things became very overtly hostile.
Now, what do you do when the person is doing their job by all objective measures beautifully? What if they get the highest student evaluations in the department?
Well, that's where you go after somebody, make them sufficiently uncomfortable.
She was isolated from the department.
They move your office around.
Must have been a moving man in a prior life because I moved her office 4 or 5 times.
They mess with your schedule.
The purpose of this harassment is to break you, to destroy you, to get you to quit.
Oh, it just went on and on and on and on and on.
This happened every day.
I wasn't being cooperative and quitting is the problem.
She had constant meetings with her deans, constant meetings with other people to talk about her problem.
We've had faculty arrested for child abuse and all kinds of terrible things, but I walk into a meeting and everyone has Freeburg files this thick. I made it very clear in writing. I said, I do not believe this is based on my performance. I do believe it's based on bias, and guess what? I'm going to look for legal remedies.
Finally went to federal court.
People during my case would rush up to me, look either way. Is anyone seeing me talk to you? By the way, I really support what you're doing, but for God's sake, don't tell anyone I said so or I'm dead. My students, in fact, after all of this blew up, were not at all surprised. They said, we knew you were a Republican, and I was, why? What am I doing? I'm talking about neurons. How can you tell I'm a Republican? The answer I got back was because of what you don't say. That they're so used to coming into every classroom, and before class starts, there's this introduction about current events, about today's newspaper, where the professor would be taking an opportunity to express political views. And of course, I never did that.
Now, this case has been settled to her favor, and she's not going to be talking about it, but let's just say that they were not nice people. And they were sending a message to anyone else that Republicans aren't welcome here.
Why did Professor Freeburg's colleagues treat her so poorly? Well, maybe they can't help it. Maybe it's just a natural result of spending so many years in a monoculture. There's no other way to describe what campuses have become. In a survey of faculty in the humanities and social sciences, Dan Klein found that for every 7 professors who were registered Democrats, there was only 1 Republican. And in certain departments, the ratio was a staggering 30-to-1.
The numbers are shocking. Practically all the professors are leftist. It's only among the older people that you get some Republicans, and those people are exiting soonest. The ratio is going to become more skewed before it becomes less. It's really extreme.
Stanley Rothman conducted a similar study. Nationwide, 72% of the professors he surveyed said they were left of center, compared to just 15% on the other side.
It's overwhelming. Faculties are to the left, overwhelmingly. More so than I anticipated.
This is hardly a marketplace of ideas. This is a monopoly. It's one size fits all. You get up, you get yours, next.
When people come around and say, well, you know, you're all the same political views, I joke and say, no, in my department we have a Republican, which is true. We may actually have 2. He may not have revealed his views, but one of them I know is a Republican, and we've always had a Republican, except for a couple of years. I don't know if we've ever had 3.
Going to a university today in the United States is like joining a church. You have to be a believer. You have to have the right set of views, or if you don't, you're excluded.
I was attacked for teaching fields that are perceived as conservative. U.S. political history, U.S. diplomatic history, and U.S. constitutional history. They say, oh, you're teaching about dead white males. And to a certain extent, that criticism was correct. And it's one of the reasons why social history as a field and African American history and women's history originated. But what we've seen in the last decade or decade and a half, as these newer social historians have become powerful within departments, is that they have turned around and said simply anyone in the department teaching about politics or diplomacy is old-fashioned and we ought not to have this approach. Teaching about the history of the American government is somehow inappropriate because these are the exploiters. This encourages racist or sexist sentiments, and therefore it is a positive good to the college to purge these sorts of topics from the curriculum.
He's a Democrat. He's a liberal Democrat, and he comes from a family of liberal Democrats. Yet, he was characterized by people in the faculty as a fascist. In certain departments, history, poli-sci, sociology, so on and so forth, Brooklyn College is engaged in a political war.
There's plenty of conservatives who quickly learn, you know what, I'm not going to take philosophy, I'm not going to take all these social sciences. In math, if you get the answer wrong, it's wrong. It's not 4, it's 5. In sociology, you get the answer wrong, and you're a bad person.
If you're open-minded, you have to be this. If you're a good-hearted person, you have to be this.
If you don't think that way, well, you're closed-minded.
You are not a good person. That you can't be liked, period. You are evil.
They really believe that this is the only view any reasonable person could possibly hold.
When students are just being bombarded with those ideas everywhere, it starts to sink in.
You pick this sort of thing up. I did. When I was an undergraduate, I learned that certain ways of looking at things were the goodly ways, just passively from the way things were discussed, from the way Republicans on campus tended to be treated.
When you're in a dominant position and you have very little contact with the opposition, you always tend to think that all decent people think like you, and the opposition must be stupid.
You ended up thinking of Republicans as fools. That was just assumed.
Other perspectives are not valuable, and so there's no need to teach those other perspectives because clearly they're wrong.
For people who take this point of view, their views are objective. They're social science and they're correct. All the alternatives are the ones that are ideology. And so it's the conservatives who are the ones who are ideological. They, the liberals, are objectively correct.
This is a problem. I think a problem even at the very best universities.
It doesn't mean that the people who do this are necessarily bad. They're just blinded by their own limitations, as we all are.
Having a sort of one-party state in the classroom is that it leads to certain kinds of intellectual laziness. People can be gestural, and they can make gestures. Everyone in the room knows we're on the side of the angels, so the gestures don't get criticized. But you step outside of that room, and certain gestural leftisms will be criticized, and you really need to know how to deal with them.
I've often heard my liberal colleagues, after an election that the Democrats have lost, say, I don't understand. I don't know a single person that voted Republican. They should get out more.
We must preserve difference. We must preserve heterogeneity. You know, when the academic left says this, almost all the time, we usually mean heterogeneity we like.
The big buzzword on college campuses is diversity, diversity, diversity. We talk about diversity of skin color. We talk about having different ethnicities come to campus. We have affirmative action programs, that type of thing. The university is totally ignoring diversity of thought.
Many schools have offices dedicated to enforcing diversity. At Stanford, the Diversity Office pledges to create an environment that welcomes and appreciates differences. But among the humanities and social science departments studied by Dan Klein, Stanford has a lopsided ratio of 144 to 10. I guess the Diversity Office isn't doing such a great job.
Hi. Could you tell me where the Diversity Office is?
Mm-hmm. Are you looking for Rosa?
She's not here. Oh, do you know when she might be back?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know where she is.
She's not out today, is she?
No, she was here. I saw her. Sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. Thanks a lot. Take care.
It was almost noon, so maybe the office was closed for lunch. I tried again a little bit later.
Hello.
Hi, what are you doing?
I'm looking for the Diversity Office. Do you happen to know where she is?
Probably at a meeting.
Oh, okay. Is it all right if we wait?
I don't know when she's coming back.
We've got time. Someone earlier told us that she saw her here.
There's no one here.
We came in here about an hour and a half
I'm sorry,
ago.
there is no one here.
Well, we'll just sit right here. We won't bother anybody. We just had a couple of questions. I mean, maybe if...
I'm going to make a phone call.
As I waited for the diversity office to reopen, I overheard the woman calling the police. They never would have found me based on her description, so I figured I'd help out a bit.
I'll give her my identification if she needs it, so she doesn't have to give such a vague
No,
description.
he's got on a t-shirt and
If you
green
need my,
khaki pants.
Here's all my information.
I don't need it, sir.
Okay.
Out front of the building.
Are you looking for Rosa?
Yeah.
She's in and out a lot.
We'd be happy to wait. I mean,
It
you know,
could be forever.
we've got nothing else to do today.
As we waited, our other friends stood guard. And when one woman came by, she was warned not to come in.
Is that Rosa? Can we...
I have no idea. If you'd like to go find out.
You don't know if this is Rosa?
No, I don't.
You don't know who works in your own office?
Yeah, that's it. In this tiny little office that holds maybe 10 people, this woman, who says she's the office manager, has absolutely no idea what her coworker looks like. Was I ever going to get a chance to ask this elusive Rosa about the diversity office? I guess not.
Hi, how are you? Evan Maloney, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you? I'm gonna have to ask you guys to, I guess the building would like you to step outside for a second.
We just had two very simple questions for the diversity office to see how diverse the diversity office really is. And you know, I can understand their uncomfortable questions for Stanford University.
What would you like me to do to help you out here?
It looks like we're shut down, so we'll mosey on. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you.
Take care.
See you guys later.
All right.
Good luck with the rest of your film.
Enjoy the day.
I will.
Those cops could not have been nicer.
To this day, the diversity office still hasn't explained why Stanford's faculty has so little intellectual diversity. Maybe they're so busy making sure people look different that they really don't care if everyone thinks the same. So the question is, does any of this really matter? The American Council of Trustees and Alumni commissioned a study to find out.
Study after study has outlined the political imbalance in the classroom in terms of the registration of faculty members. What the American Council of Trustees and Alumni thought was missing was the piece, what was the effect in the classroom? Because despite all of these studies about political registrations, the academic community essentially said that this was not a problem. They denied it was an issue, and they said that faculty members left their politics at the classroom door. We wanted to find out, is that true? So we went to the students themselves. We wanted to ask them, what is your sense of the atmosphere in your classroom? Is it an open exchange of ideas? Are you encouraged to raise questions? Are there topics that are off limits that you can't talk about? What really are you finding in your classroom, and do you have the freedom to learn? And what we found was a significant percentage of students complained that politics was being introduced into their classroom, and that it was not, in fact, being left at the college door as the academic community had indicated. 49% of the students said that politics was introduced in class even when it had nothing to do with the subject.
French literature, you'll have the professor opining on the war in Iraq.
If you want to take a class on ecology, it's going to be ecology and politics.
In English classes, it's not political science, it's not humanities, it's English.
I've been learning in geography class that gender is socially constructed.
I really don't know why issues such as global warming and globalization and militarism are brought up in a class of German literature.
I took organic chemistry last semester. I never knew that carbon chains had anything to do with politics, but they do.
She talked about a discussion of Iraq in her class, by the way, in Romance languages, had nothing to do with Iraq, and that the students were uncomfortably silent. And she treated this as a sense that the students were not politically aware enough. I would interpret this as the students wanted to learn about Romance languages, not about the professor's view on Iraq.
Another professor who felt very strongly about it gave extra credit for students precinct walking for Democratic candidates, but would not allow extra credit for anybody else.
Yeah, there are some classrooms, including sometimes mine, in which conservatives might not feel entirely comfortable. In some cases, it may involve not knowing if the professor is grading you fairly, and that's the real issue.
Nearly a third of the students say that they felt that their grade would be in danger if they did not agree with the perspective of the professor. That is a substantial number.
They're afraid to give their viewpoint in class because they know it won't be tolerated, and they're afraid because their grade is in jeopardy.
He said something about, oh, don't worry, I don't have any biases against anyone except Republicans.
When I got my final paper back, he wrote something about how it seemed that my libertarian perspective on every issue seemed to distance me from the class. If you want to participate in mainstream discussion, the kind of discussion that I want in my classrooms, you're going to have to shift from that and start moving towards where the rest of us are.
We have to do our evaluations. One of the questions was, what did you learn in this class? And she said, well, I'm going to write that I learned how to conform my beliefs to fit my TAs so I can get a decent grade.
We just put down what he says and we turn our papers, and that's all we have to do.
I can write about this topic that's more liberal, and it'll be a lot easier. I'm a lot less likely to be challenged.
You were kind of just going to have to regurgitate what he had said and what he believed in order to get the good grade.
Education becomes a spectator sport.
I often give them a statement in quotation marks and ask them to agree or disagree. I've noticed that most of them, whatever I put in quotes, most of them will agree with. This is right, and there's something wrong here.
What most faculty want is for students to validate their pathetic life experiences. If we were secure, we would have different jobs. But we're faculty, and so we want people to agree with us, to nod, to write stuff down as if it were important.
And that's what passes as education.
And classrooms aren't the only places you'll find university employees pushing politics. Schools often pay people to operate administrative offices that are blatantly political in nature. Take, for instance, the Office of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Awareness at Bucknell University. This office held events and sent campus-wide emails telling students to support gay marriage. Now, whether or not you support gay marriage is beside the point. The question is, should paid university employees be actively encouraging students to adopt their politics? Bucknell also pays the staff of the Women's Resource Center, which now sponsors bus trips to political rallies like this one in Washington, D.C. But when female students approach the Women's Center to arrange a trip to a rally with a different political perspective, they were turned down. Many schools have similar offices, and their self-proclaimed purpose is to support equality between the sexes. Let's see how they're doing. Excuse me. I was wondering if you could help me. I'm a little lost. Do you know the campus very well?
Yeah.
We're not from around here, actually, and we're not even sure if we're in the right building. Do you know the area pretty well? I'm from New York City. I don't know this campus at all.
We do masculinity studies and women's studies.
We're looking for the Men's Resource Center. Is the Men's Center also in here, or is that somewhere else? We just saw a sign for the Women's Center from the road, so we figured maybe it's like the women's room and the men's room. You know, like the bathrooms are right next door to each other. I'm looking for the Men's Studies Department.
Men's studies?
The Men's Center?
It's not here?
No.
Do you know where it is? Yeah, we can't find it. Is it nearby?
There is no men's center.
We don't have a men's resource center.
There is no such thing as men's studies. Men's locker room.
The men's locker room. They probably wouldn't want me going in there with a camera. I'm looking for the Gender Equity Resource Center.
That's upstairs on the second floor.
Thanks a lot. We're just looking for someone from the Gender Equity Center. I'd like to lodge a complaint. Well, there seems to be, there's a women's studies program, and I found out there's no men's studies program.
You need to go to the Title IX compliance office.
Oh, okay.
That
Do you
all
think
falls under
that's
Title
something
IX.
that they would?
They have to. That's the law, Title IX. You have to.
Really?
That.
So how come nobody's done anything about that in the past?
Why wouldn't? No, I don't do Title IX work.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems odd that there would be a women's studies and no men's studies program, right?
You have to speak to the Title IX compliance officer, but that's an academic compliance issue.
Oh, okay, so that's gender equity's got nothing to do with that?
We're gender equity resource, so I'm the resource telling you where to go.
Oh, that's
Title IX
cool.
compliance in 200 California Hall.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a
Be
good
well.
day, sir. Take care. Title IX. I'd heard that before. It's the law that prevents gender discrimination in higher education. Bucknell University shut down the men's wrestling team because of Title IX. Too much money was being spent on men's sports. But Title IX extends beyond sports. So even though people laughed at the idea of a men's center, not having one may actually be illegal. Today, only 44% of college students are men. So now that men are in the minority, shouldn't they get a resource center too? Well, we tried, unsuccessfully, to file a complaint. And even though our questions didn't get us anywhere, at least we learned the real purpose of these programs.
The Women's Center promotes feminism, where you try to protect women and we try to get them involved in politics,
Get them involved in politics? Oh, good for her to admit it. Finding professors who admit to having a political agenda is much more rare. But in the wake of September 11th, many students have begun to figure it out on their own.
Since September 11th, students have begun to question the faculty.
They've been trying to explain to the students, America brought it on herself, that it's America's fault.
We kind of brought it upon ourselves, basically.
There was never one professor who said September 11th was not a justified action.
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Rarely ever does a professor say positive things about what America's done.
America is the root of evil in the world.
America is a racist, sexist, homophobic, bigoted country. Has a lot of currency here.
There certainly aren't any, why America is good courses around. There's a lot of why America is bad.
Anytime, anywhere the United States uses force, it is inappropriate. This is a theme that seems to come up a lot in classes that have nothing to do with whether or not the United States uses force. The intent now seems to be to train students that everything the United States and Israel does in the Middle East is wrong.
There is a pervasive anti-Americanism which holds America responsible for all or most of the ills in the world.
You're going to get a lot more support and a lot less flack if you argue that U.S. military or foreign policy actions are wrong. Capitalism is bad. Western civilization is marked primarily by evil and depredation.
Have you ever heard of a professor saying anything positive about the United States?
I'm thinking.
Well, this student had something positive to say about the United States, but his professor did not approve.
I'm a Kuwaiti citizen. I came here 6 months ago. In August 2nd, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. It overtook the entire country within a day. Constantly, there was darkness. We couldn't see sunlight because Iraqi soldiers were burning Kuwaiti oil wells. My 2 uncles were kidnapped and taken to a southern Iraqi prison. They still can't discuss the atrocities and the terrible things that happened to them. And all these terrible things stopped from happening because of the United States of America. After I wrote a pro-American essay upholding the U.S. Constitution, he called me into his office. He told me to explain myself. He said, because I'm a Kuwaiti citizen, therefore I am biased, that the founding fathers were elitists and that the U.S. Constitution was written for the benefit of the founding fathers only. He threatened me into seeking regular psychological help. I'll go to the Dean of International Admissions, who has the power to take away my visa. He threatened my entire future in this country. Because I love this country, I may get thrown out of this country.
2 days later, Foothill College approved the first of 2 anonymous flyers that attacked Ahmad personally.
There's a flyer distributed all over Foothill College comparing me to Adolf Hitler and a suicide bomber. There's a stamp on it. The Foothill College Student Activities Office, Foothill College, approved that message.
Well, that just doesn't seem right. If Steve Hinkle was almost arrested for posting his flyer, how could this one get an official stamp of approval? I was wondering if we might be able to speak with someone about how flyers get approved for posting on campus.
Flyers get approved?
Yeah.
That's Bill, I guess?
That's student affairs?
Rita.
I've been wanting to do this, but
6201.
6201?
That brick building.
Okay.
Right there.
Thanks a
The
lot.
first door to the left.
Hello. I'm looking for someone named Bill. Hi, Bill. My name's Evan Maloney.
Hi.
I was wondering if you had a moment to chat about how flyers get posted on campus, how they get approved, and whether you have any record of who submits them.
I'll talk to you, but you have to turn that off.
Do you think that anyone...
Say no until that goes off.
Do you think that anyone would be willing to speak on camera? Even when we weren't filming, Bill was no help at all. But luckily for us, the head of the office stopped in. Your office approved this flyer.
No comment.
Is this not a state-run school?
No comment.
Taxpayers of California pay for your office to approve a flyer that compares...
Bill, call the campus police.
So nobody can comment on this flyer?
What?
Well, it's approved by this office.
That isn't accurate.
That stamp is not from your office?
That isn't accurate.
What's not accurate?
That flyer,
this
what
is your
you're
office's
intimating.
stamp. Can you at least verify that this is your stamp from this office?
I can't verify that.
So there's nobody in this office who can verify whether or not your office approved this flyer?
I can say that that was not approved.
It was not approved.
I
So
don't-
someone forged your stamp.
I can't say that. It's possible that someone had the stamp who shouldn't have had the stamp and used it inappropriately.
Okay, that's what
That's a possibility.
You don't keep records on this?
No, because this isn't the office that reviewed posting.
Could you point me in the direction of the office that would approve posting?
We do it now. We
Oh, you do it
review
now?
materials.
But on February 9th you didn't?
I don't know that that's an accurate document with an appropriate stamp.
It says approved
I can't
February
verify
9th.
that, sir. Please leave my office.
Somebody approved this flyer. If you read these flyers, these don't sound like the flyers that a student would write. If a professor is comparing one of the students who took his class to Hitler and to suicide bombers, a student, by the way, from the Middle East, then I think that's a story. Okay, so then can you just give me the name of the person who on February 18th and February 9th approved flyers?
I don't know who had that responsibility.
So then you don't know the process.
I know the process, but I can't answer that question specifically.
Okay, well then all I'll do is just go over here and maybe they can give me information about the flyer.
I would rather you not. I don't think the person who can answer that question is there either.
Can you give me the name of the person who can answer the question?
No.
All right, so clearly Foothill College wasn't going to do anything about these flyers, but it's not always so easy to get approval for posting on college campuses. When DePaul University invited Professor Ward Churchill to speak on campus, the administration stopped a student group from posting flyers, saying that their criticism of him was nothing more than propaganda. But the flyers merely quoted Professor Churchill's own views, the same views the school was paying him to present. Ward Churchill became famous for saying that the nearly 3,000 dead on September 11th were legitimate targets and that the United States should be wiped off the map. He may sound like an extremist, but in academia he's something of a celebrity. And while Ward Churchill is raking it in on the collegiate speaking circuit, not everyone who visits campus finds it nearly as welcoming. All over the country, a small minority of students is having a huge impact.
Around the country, a number of campuses have been doing really fantastic anti-recruiter activism.
We're a part of a national trend of students, of community members
who are saying to get the military out of our community.
With the help of their professors, student protests are driving military recruiters off campus and are shutting down training programs like ROTC. Although the stated reason for these protests is opposition to Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the policy that prevents gays from serving openly in the military, I got the feeling there was more to it than that.
I'm against the military in general.
It's a racist institution, it's a classist institution against the people that attacks in other countries, against the people that attacks in this country. We just need to focus more on demilitarization and less on the idea of queer discrimination.
How many people here marched against the war before it started? That has a lot to do with why we're here. We're gonna put the war on trial.
It's about the issue of the U.S. military who's recruiting people to fight in the occupation of Iraq and to fight for the interest of a small minority of people in this country, which is the U.S. capitalist class.
These are the words. If you know them, sing with us.
We don't support the military. We don't support the military. We need them off the campus, out of other countries, out of our country altogether.
You've got to look at the capitalist system behind this. It's not just about the discrimination of the military. It's about the fact that the U.S. military is part of the imperialist war machine.
Military, go away! How many lives have you told today?
These peace activists aren't always so peaceful. ROTC buildings at NC State and UNC Chapel Hill were vandalized, and at UC Santa Cruz, recruiters visiting campus had their tires slashed.
Get out of our school! Get out of our school!
And at San Francisco State, a student mob stormed a campus job fair where the Army Corps of Engineers had the nerve to offer employment. The entire job fair was shut down, affecting not only the military, but every single company that paid to be there. As the mob occupied the university building, the administration did not intervene. All right, so they oppose the war. They certainly have the right to do that. But don't the rest of the students have a right to seek employment wherever they choose? And what about the employers who paid good money to be there? A recent Supreme Court decision allows the federal government to withhold funding from schools that ban the military. But barely a month after that decision, a mob at UC Santa Cruz succeeded in driving military recruiters from campus. And while American soldiers aren't terribly welcome on campus, the people at war with them are. After the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan that followed September 11th, the official spokesman for the Taliban regime, Rahmatullah Hashemi, managed to avoid prison and instead was invited to study here in the U.S. at Yale. According to the Wall Street Journal, Hashemi had a 4th grade education. That's not typically Yale material. And Yale's not the only school cozying up to terrorists. Columbia recently hosted a video conference featuring Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. His regime was responsible for the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. But for some reason, Columbia thought Gaddafi would be a good person to give a lecture on democracy. What's with this fetish for Middle Eastern terrorists?
In the 1970s, in the field of Middle Eastern studies, a great deal of money came in from Arab governments. Some of it came in through the Arab governments directly, also Aramco, which is the oil company and which is now in Saudi hands. The Saudi defense minister has a program named after him at Berkeley. The notion of academic freedom doesn't exist in Saudi Arabia. Harvard has a program in contemporary Arab studies, and these are all funded from money out of the Arabian Peninsula. Georgetown Center for Contemporary Arab Studies took money indiscriminately from just about every Arab government. On the day Baghdad fell, they had an outreach program. Every single speaker was an anti-war activist.
There's sympathy on the part of the leftists towards the Islamists. They both have an opposition to the United States and what it stands for.
Every radical is a potential moderate. They may be wrong to use certain methods, such as violence, but it's understandable. Why is it understandable? Because the academics sympathize with the rationale.
It's bad enough that the academics missed the problems that led to 9/11, but what's even more striking is that they're still doing it even after 9/11.
I think the attitude is the United States just can't do any good. It can do nothing right.
What the taxpayer is getting for his tens of millions of dollars is a far left analysis, full of gender, class, and race, full of anti-American vitriol, full of vitriol for the allies of the United States, and sympathy for the enemies of the United States. The United States is the problem. Whatever the issue is, the United States is the reason why things aren't going right.
With that kind of attitude about the U.S., it's no surprise that in the wake of 9/11, the American flag wasn't terribly welcome on campus either.
One of the bus drivers, feeling patriotic, feeling the impact of what had happened that week, he decided to put an American flag up in his bus. He was told by one of the administrators that that is not acceptable because it could create an intimidating atmosphere for students not from the United States. Flying the flag of a country within that country is offensive.
Sadly, Lehigh was not alone. Right after September 11th, a number of other schools took down flags or even banned their display outright. Dorm residents at Central Michigan University were told to remove American flags from their doors. And in the cafeteria at Arizona State, an American flag was taken down over worries that it could offend foreign students. But the most extreme example involves a friend of Todd Beamer's. Beamer died on September 11th, leading the passenger revolt that spared our nation's capital from another attack. So you can understand Beamer's friend having a little pride mixed in with all that grief. The friend, who worked in the sociology department at Holy Cross, hung an American flag at her desk in his honor. The story made national news when the department chairman told the woman to take the flag down. I guess it's just not politically correct to pay tribute to someone like Todd Beamer on a college campus.
At the one-year anniversary, September 11th, the administration and the student government had actually planned to ban any kind of display of patriotism. You couldn't go up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. You couldn't go up and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. You couldn't go up with your American flag. Most students on campus didn't understand why we couldn't have an American flag. I mean, if you remember back to the post 9/11 times, that was a big symbol and a comforting symbol to a lot of people.
I don't get it. When I was growing up, my parents were liberals, but they had no irrational fear of the American flag. They'd never support punishing people for their ideas, and they were obviously tolerant because they ended up raising someone like me.
You bring up a kid to think for himself, you can't really complain if he does.
So what was going on in universities? Had these people lived in a bubble for so long that they'd forgotten what the word liberal really means? In the 1960s, student protesters complained about the police, who they called pigs. But now, many of these same people were calling the pigs on me.
We're working on a documentary film for a company called On the Fence Films. On the Fence Films.
So are you a student?
No. Are you guys students?
You got permits?
Who are you?
My name's Evan Maloney, class of 94. We're doing a documentary on political correctness.
On the fence?
Yeah.
You were denied permission.
We never asked for permission, so I don't see how we could be denied.
Well, now you're denied, so now you can leave.
And despite hundreds of phone calls and emails, there was not one administrator at any school who agreed to an interview. So we kept showing up in person. Not that that helped.
Hi. Would you please put that down? Put it down now.
I wish I could have made a film about academia that didn't talk so much about Democrats or Republicans. But the fact is, academics are obsessed with politics. And in an environment where speech codes can get you kicked out of school or fired from your job, the political leanings of the people who interpret those codes is very much relevant. The 1960s saw the birth of what was called the campus free speech movement. I guess it didn't succeed. Either that, or they really only wanted freedom for their own speech. And that's a shame. Historically, universities have done great work for our society. And for every academic who acts like a political bully, there might be a half dozen decent ones who don't speak up. Well, it's time they did. And if they won't, then the rest of us will have to. Because this just isn't working. It's time for a new movement on campus, a movement to support intellectual diversity and genuine tolerance. So join the fight, because this is a war worth winning. And until then, remember these words: no justice, no peace.
Nowhere in this textbook does it say Bush equals Hitler, and nowhere in this chapter does it claim we had it coming, and no way in this room can you blame capitalism, and no way on this earth will I be swayed. Shut up and teach, don't give a speech, keep your political beliefs all to yourself until the bell. Your job, as far as I can tell, doesn't include indoctrination. So could you please shut up and teach? I will not be force-fed anymore of your liberal garbage, and I will not write down what's on that board, 'cause it's so stupid, and I can't just sit back and ignore your bias grading. This is not what we all came here for. Shut up and teach, don't give a speech, keep your political beliefs all to yourself until the bell. Your job, as far as I can tell, doesn't include indoctrination. So could you please shut up and teach? It's called a textbook, why don't you read it? You'd be amazed at what you'd find inside. It's nothing like what you've been feeding. I guess you must have thought we were blind. Just keep ranting while I sit right here with my recorder. I'll see you at McDonald's next school year, and you can take my order, 'cause you might lose your job if you don't learn to stick to the curriculum. You had your say, now I think it's our turn. Shut up and teach, don't give a speech, keep your political beliefs all to yourself until the bell. Your job, as far as I can tell, doesn't include indoctrination. So could you please just show up and do your job? I know that sounds extreme. Just shut up and teach, shut up and teach. No more indoctrination, please. Shut up and teach, shut up and teach. No more indoctrination. Shut up and teach.